Welcome to our fourth Xenia series in the anthropology of travel, tourism, and pilgrimage. Today we're joined by Emily Miller, who will talk about her experiences in the Migration Museum in London. I would just like to say thank you to everybody that has signed up today. We seem to have an increasingly large net and wide demographic of people from all over the world, just because of the various time zones that people are on. It's always interesting that some are having their breakfast and some are getting ready for dinner now, as we span about 14 different hours of timing. At the moment, the Xenia series in the anthropology of travel, tourism, and pilgrimage continues once a month and has exciting seminars that occur. And for those of you that have signed up and those of you that have continued to look forward to what we have each month, you'll recognize that diversity is certainly a wonderful component of this, with no 2 months having the same theme, although of course these all come under this wonderful umbrella of anthropology of travel, tourism, and pilgrimage. Thank you very much for joining us, Emily. I'm going to pass this on to Tom Selwyn to introduce you properly. It is such a pleasure that you're here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jeff. I'm going to spend three minutes perhaps introducing Emily, and I'm very fortunate to be able to read a text that Emily sent about herself, which is what I will do. Just before that, I may say that last year in the summer, Safet and I and all our students from the Anthropology of Travel, Tourism and Pilgrimage Summer School went to the Migration Museum, and we were under the aegis of Emily for half a day. And all I can say is that she set us up. I mean, the museum set us up. The exhibition, which was called Room to Breathe, set us up for the 3 weeks of the school. What Emily did was to arrange us in a circle. The first thing when we got there, we were all in a circle, and she asked us certain questions about whether we were migrants ourselves, or whether we knew people who were, or whether we had relations who were either immigrants or emigrants. And each time we said yes, or when we said yes to any of her questions, we stood up. And it was extraordinary. After about 1 minute, everybody, and I think there were about 25 of us, were all standing and very close together. And this circle that she made us into, so to speak, made us feel very much together, at home together. And the students we had were from all over the world, some including about 8 students from China. So that was a very strong experience that we had. Emily is head of learning and partnerships, and now I'm reading her text, and I'll just make 1 or 2 little observations about things that we do which are related to what she has written, things that we do in Bethlehem University and also in SOAS itself. Emily is head of learning and partnerships at the Migration Museum in London, and she's had the role since the project first started in 2013. Since then, she has grown the education program from scratch, reaching now 12,000 students, which is a huge amount. And I may say there are 2 bits of research in Bethlehem University that are also looking at educational projects in schools, education about travel, tourism, pilgrimage, heritage, and so on. So there's an immediate match there. And she has established many relationships across the education, museums, and culture sectors. She loves, as she puts it, to network for the sake of developing the museum. And the museum, we can all testify that the museum has a huge network of relations all over the place. She has a social anthropology degree from Manchester, which she graduated from in 2006. And her dissertation was about truth and reconciliation in South Africa under or after the apartheid regime, which reminds us of Colin Murray's chapter in the book that Nicola and I edited called Travelling Towards Home. Then she was trained in citizenship and civil society, and taught in a secondary school in Manchester, moving on to teach philanthropy and social action. She took a gap year, so to speak, and in that year, one of the several things that she did was to walk along the Camino Santiago de Compostela, and that does remind us of the fact that our program in SOAS is very much travel, tourism, and pilgrimage. And I think the idea of pilgrimage is something that the Museum of Migration is very much, it's there somewhere. It stands in many of the corners of the museum. And then she was teaching English and so on, and then she went to do a master's program in conflict resolution in the Peace Studies division at Bradford University, which has a very strong reputation in that field. And it's interesting that one of the most important initiatives in Bethlehem, or rather in Palestine generally, is the Masa Ibrahim, which was started off by a whole lot of people, including university colleagues and so on. So conflict, pilgrimage, migration, and all these things, this is what Emily has been doing. And finally, as she puts it, and I'll read her last sentence, she has hung up her walking boots for now and lives in London. However, she was wearing the walking boots during a walk with Refugee Tales. And by the way, that is a really important book to read. And Refugee Tales is associated with a charity that Emily is involved with. When she met her now partner, a Kurdish Iranian refugee who teaches her something new about love, life, and the universe every day. Emily, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom. There we go, a little introduction to me, the professional and the personal there. It's really good to meet you all today. Thank you for sharing your evening, lunchtime, morning coffee, wherever you're at across the world. What a great opportunity to meet you all. And those of you who I can see on my screen, thanks for all your lovely smiles. So I'm going to take the next maybe 20 minutes, I suppose, 20, 30, to present about the Migration Museum and our journey to establishing a migration museum for the UK. And then really open to any and all of your questions, comments, feedback, connections, thoughts. You know, I love to network for the Migration Museum. So let's leave lots of space for that at the end, and I'll try and kind of keep to time for that. I'm going to share some images now, all being well. You can all see that, I'm hoping. Yes, is that right, Tom? Yep.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic.
Yep.
So this is the strapline for our project, for our museum, all our stories. We kind of start from the premise, really, that everybody has a migration story. It just depends sometimes how far back you go in their ancestry and their family history, or how far out you go through their connections to the wider world beyond the UK. And that, I suppose, is the activity that Tom mentioned that we do with all of our school groups, university groups, and community groups around that, taking a step forward, those connections to migration. It's really, we're looking at migration as being a kind of connecting topic rather than a very divisive topic, where how it's often laid out in the UK and possibly in your countries too. So just that's my contact details if you want to follow up after this, and that's my Twitter handle. I'm gradually beginning to use Twitter more and more, so please follow and tweet me, and that would be great to connect with you there afterwards. So I'm going to just go all the way back quickly to tell you how I first came across the Migration Museum project. Back in 2012 it was, because I suppose quite a lot of you are coming from academic backgrounds or working in different universities right now, and so I'll focus a bit on that side before moving on to the journey to set up a museum from scratch. So this is a picture of the Musée National de l'Histoire de l'Immigration in Paris, in France. I think some of you might be calling in from France today, and if that's the case, you might well know this interesting building. It was built as the Palais De Colony back when Paris hosted the World Fair in the 1920s, I think it was. And this building really shows the French imperial story, and all of the friezes are of then French colonies. And so it's quite an interesting building to house a migration museum that's really trying to tell the history, the good, the bad, the ugly, the tensions, etc., of French immigration. So anyway, I was in Paris doing some interviews for this master's that Tom mentioned that I did at Bradford, while lots of my contemporaries were doing their master's dissertations about female freedom fighters or Hezbollah or community grassroots peace-building activities in East Timor, whatever it might be. I ended up looking at attitudes towards immigration because that kind of connected with my previous, my degree previously and my work in this school in Manchester, and I kind of reverted to what I knew and wanted to learn more about. And so I was doing these interviews with young people in Paris, in London, and in Bradford. And I used to live in Paris previously, and so my housemate from back then, who I was staying with again during my master's, said, "Go, you should go to the Immigration Museum and see what you can learn there to kind of complement your studies." And so I went round and ended up being, I don't know about you, but I shouldn't really possibly say this, but I often find museums incredibly boring. I'm not like, my attention span and my ENFP kind of Myers-Briggs breakdown means that I have quite a short attention span, and really I need to be taught and shown and told things. And so we ended up co-opting a kind of visitor service front of house guy who was amazing, family from Algeria, and just like such a sardonic, great sense of humor. Anyway, he showed us around and kind of pulled out things that he found interesting and things that he wanted to show and tell us about. And on the way out, I said to him, I think I said it in bad French, but I'll say it here in English. I can't believe there's not, something like this in the UK. What are we doing? That immigration and emigration and that whole side of our story is a massive part of our history, and yet we don't have somewhere that's doing what you're doing. And he said, there is something going on. He said, I don't know, someone came to visit us and did research here, who's doing their PhD in England. Look her up. And he gave me her name. And so I went away, and that evening came across Dr. Mary Stevens, who wrote her PhD about the possibility of an establishment of a migration museum in the UK. And so that evening, I emailed my now boss to say, "Oh my God, I visited this museum in Paris, and I used to teach citizenship, and this is what I'm researching, and wouldn't it be amazing if there was a museum, and can you keep in touch, etc." And she emailed back saying, "Yeah, there's we've got a funding application in for an education officer." And so I signed up to the mailing list. And long story short, finished my master's, couldn't find a job in the UK, got really dispirited. Took about 6 weeks for me to just lose hope. Moved to Holland to do some work in The Hague instead, and just kind of get away from things. And on the mailing list for the Migration Museum, this job came through in maybe job possibility in maybe January. And I applied, and 2 interviews later, I got it. So I think it was just the only time in my life really that I've, as it were, kind of walked out of a museum here in Paris and said, if there was ever something like this in the UK, I would want to be involved. And, down the line, hold on to hope, got the opportunity. So that's the background of my hearing about the Migration Museum and getting involved. And so when I first started, it was my boss, Sophie, who was started off as a volunteer, and then eventually the income came in for her to become a paid member of staff, and Andrew, who's in this meeting with us today, and we kind of all sat around my boss's kitchen table for a good first year of the project, really just scheming and planning and kind of working out what our next steps should be. And we got our first bit of funding for a photography exhibition called 100 Images of Migration. That was happening just as I came on board and got the job. And so that was a competition with the Guardian newspaper, one of our broadsheets, for people to send in photos of migration. So we had this great resource that has kept growing ever since. it turns out that photos have incredible power, and that really got us going, because we displayed it in Hackney Museum, a museum in London, and just began to kind of show what we were about and get going. And that's when more funding came in, and we began to kind of step up and be able to employ some more people, etc. So we were homeless to begin with. I suppose I should just take like a half step back, a moment to say that obviously I came on board in 2013, but very much the idea for this setting up a museum was already going. I'm not claiming credit for that idea from the beginning. What happened really was our chair, the chair of our board, used to be my immigration minister in the Labour government. And ever since 2008, I believe, she was kind of on record saying, we really need a space, we really need a migration museum for the UK to kind of understand our history, know where we've come from, know where we're at and where we're heading in terms of migration, and a kind of safe space where we can learn. So she got kind of a group around her who agreed with this and wanted this mission to be accomplished. And yeah, there's various ways that all of us got involved. But Sophie, my director, has a background as an immigration barrister and an immigration judge, and so but she came across the project and got involved. So it's I think the concept of starting a museum from scratch, a kind of startup museum, is kind of an oxymoron, a kind of internally contradictory idea, and yet that's what we're doing. And lo and behold, we're now part of an alliance of different museums who are starting from scratch here in the UK. It's definitely a trend, definitely a thing. So, and I can talk more about that later. But we were homeless to begin with. As I said, you can't really create a museum at a kitchen table. So from the kitchen table, we schemed and connected with various partnerships that led us to doing work in these three buildings. Just for example, the top, can you see my cursor? This one. This is the Royal Festival Hall. That was a great partnership back in 2015 to 16, part of a big exhibition they had called Adopting Britain, 70 Years of Immigration into Britain. So we had a few of our photos and a few of our objects on display in that exhibition. So very much got incredible kind of audiences by being with the South Bank Centre, who are a kind of cultural giant here in London. Just below this, we have the Museum of London Docklands, in an old storage warehouse that used to store goods from the then West Indies. They look at the kind of Docklands, the history of Docklands, and we were part of their education programme, used their space for our workshops. So that was a kind of good partnership as well. And then this here at the bottom left is the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, where we kind of took over one of their community engagement spaces for, I think it was 6 months, and did various workshops and outreach projects. So this is all to say that we started by very much working with other people in other people's spaces to kind of really build the momentum for what we were trying to achieve on our own. I hope that makes sense. If any of this doesn't make sense, or if any of this is leaving you a bit with more questions, please save your questions up and definitely grill me at the end. So I can't remember exactly. Oh, there's I've missed one section. We had the opportunity after 20, it was in 2016, I think, Andrew, I hope I'm right, that we, yes, yep. It was just the 3 weeks leading up to June, that's right. We had the opportunity to do something on our own. So as I said, as you can see from these ones, this was all kind of in partnership with other people's spaces. In 2016, we had an opportunity to do have our own space for just 3 weeks, but it's incredible what you can fit into 3 weeks, or incredible what the Migration Museum team can fit into 3 weeks. So we had a space in Shoreditch, East London, a kind of empty, kind of industrial type space on Redchurch Street, where we decided to host an exhibition. I think it's quite brave for your first kind of major exhibition on your own. We did it about Calais and about the jungle refugee and migrant camp that was kind of exploding up till around that time, especially with the migration crisis, I use inverted commas, in 2015. And there were, at the beginning of 2016, about 10,000 people in that camp, just across the water, closer to London than Birmingham is Calais. So we did an exhibition with displaying art created by artists kind of stuck in the camp. Our curators went across and built these relationships and kind of built relationships with other NGOs, working relief organizations, etc. And we really tried to convey some of the stories and the lives and the background to some of the residents in the camp. You know, because every 10,000 residents, every different person has their different experience, their different story of how they've come to be there and what they hope for, what's coming next. So it was an exhibition that was definitely a risk. And yet, I mean, our curators, I think Andrew will definitely agree with me, just are so skilled and so kind of sensitive and creative and have incredibly high standards. So I can boast about them all the time because I'm not involved really. I just show things to the groups and the young people that visit. So the Calais exhibition in 2016, I think really did propel us onto a new level because although it was only 3 weeks, we had this chance to be like, this is who we are, this is what we're doing. Imagine what we could do with a bigger space. So bigger space, what you can see on the screen in front of you is a photo from someone standing up in the kind of, I suppose, kind of gallery area where we were given, how many 100 meters squared, I'm not sure. We had a big kind of 2 gallery space and a kind of area for a cafe up on level 1 of this massive building just off the river in central London, where Tom and Safet originally came with their group, their summer school, some of who might be on the call today, and hello again if that's the case. So this is a view down to like the main space, the main floor, with me and my small broom. It used to be a fire engine workshop. So we were opposite the London Fire Brigade headquarters. This used to be where they brought the fire engines in to fix them and do maintenance. When that industry shipped out of town because it's expensive to have real estate in central London, this became empty. It was broken into for illegal raves. It was squatted. There was all kinds of community organising going on, but eventually it was shut down for those purposes, and was kind of given over to about 10 different artists and organisations, including the Migration Museum project. So we were in there and we were told we could have it space for 3 months, and it ended up being 2.5 years. Because planning permission to tear this building down, which is ultimately the aim, and it's going to, I think, happen in 2021 probably, is a very long game. So we ended up being part of their long game, which is great. And again, this propelled us to the next stage. Again, we had a really decent space to have an exhibition, a new exhibition every year, to grow our team, to host these thousands of young people, comedy nights, massive yoga sessions in that space. Can you imagine? So yeah, that was a really important stage for us. And it, every place you move into gives you a chance to show people around and to say, look what we're doing here. Look who's coming. Look the feedback that we're getting, the evaluation that we're getting. Imagine what we could do with a permanent home. Because through all of this journey, that is our ultimate aim, and that does remain our aim, is to have a permanent home for the Migration Museum in central London, preferably kind of zone 1, zone 2 central, because of the kind of amount of, usually in a non-pandemic situation, the amount of national tourism and national visitors, repeat visits, and also international kind of interest and visits. So yeah, we've moved from when I first interviewed for the project back in 2013. The plan was to have a fully migrating migration museum, kind of popping up from city to city like the circus, taking a national story, but then being having that influenced by the locality where we were going to pop up. But it turns out that shipping containers are either on a ship or static. There's various structures in the UK and other countries that are built from shipping containers, but they don't move. Moving them is really flipping expensive. So we've kind of gone back to the drawing board and decided we do want a permanent home a building in London. Any questions about that, challenges about that, very welcome, because we've talked about it as, you know, a team and with our trustees, you know, over these years, but that does remain our mission. Preferably one that leaks less than the one that you see on the screen right now. Whew, where am I up to? Let me see. So I keep talking about this team and our curators, and I just wanted to introduce you really. I won't go through everybody, but yeah, when I talk about our curators, Aditi, top left there, is our head of creative content. And she, when she was new to London, just volunteered with us and impressed us so much that we couldn't afford not to give her a job when finally some money came through. This is, you know, our head of fundraising, head of public engagement. Gradually, we've kind of grown and addressed kind of gaps in, you know, our provision and what we can offer. And Sue there, top left again, is works with Aditi as a dream team on all of our exhibitions. So yeah, that's our team. And Andrew, you can see there, he is on the call today. So questions he can answer as well, maybe. I'm just thinking about some highlights really of, you know, I talked about the setting up of a museum as being a roller coaster. I guess I'm going to talk about a low light quickly before moving on to a couple of highlights. So not connected to this screen, I haven't got a photo for it because it's hard to show disappointment in a photo. Well, the disappointment refers to the fact that, as I said, we're aiming to have this permanent home, and you know, that kind of work towards that comes from being kind of keyed into what's happening in different boroughs in London, with architects, with planning kind of consultants, with property development companies who have to have a kind of a social commitment, a social offer as part of big new developments, etc., etc. So it's kind of a real web. And we in I think it must have been 2018, worked for pretty much a year towards, you know, pushing towards a possible permanent home, just by London Bridge, right in the centre of London, in a borough that really care about us and that we really want to be in, which is Southwark. And basically the property development company were working with the council to kind of offer us this amazing empty ground floor, floor 1 and floor 2 space right in the centre of London. And we, as a small team with very limited means, poured everything into developing that idea and to proving that that could work. But in the end, just as it was coming up to nearly a year after we'd first got that opportunity, planning permission fell through because the building that we were set to be part of was deemed to be too high and to be an eyesore. And so they had to chop 7 floors off. And you can imagine what gets chopped off, because we were not going to bring them any profit. We kind of got chopped. And so I think when I talk about a roller coaster, I think that, you know, setting up a museum, setting up anything from scratch, I'm sure like there's just some really fantastic breakthroughs, some amazing moments. And there's also some times when you really get your hopes up and you really work hard towards something that then doesn't come through, because you're at the whim of other people and kind of the systems and the powers that be. So I suppose just to go back to these 2 slides, really what keeps me in the job, and I think keeps all of us in the job, you know, as part of this team, is the team. It just couldn't happen if we as a group didn't get on and weren't all pushing towards the same mission, really. So yeah, thank God for that. The day we found out that the permanent home opportunity, that permanent home opportunity had fallen through, our director just the next day said, yep, I was disappointed. I had a glass of wine. I had an evening off. Now we're back on it. Right, what comes next? Where are we going next? And I think, yeah, that kind of sums it up really about how we are. So a highlight of our time at the workshop, which is that building I was talking about in Lambeth, is we had some great opportunities and great moments there. That is the visit from Sadiq Khan, who's this gentleman here. He's the mayor of London and holds, a real kind of political and economic influence here in London with his policies and decisions. That's me looking very pensive. In our circle time, I put everyone in circles, you see. I think circle time has a reputation here for being something you do only in primary school, sitting on the carpet around the teacher, but I do it with everyone of all ages, including the SOAS summer school. So this is a group of sixth formers who will definitely rule the world one day. They're incredibly eloquent. Many of them have gone on to become part of our youth panel, well, when they're not at Oxford or Cambridge, which I think is nearly all of them. So they're from a sixth form just across the river, and it's great to be able to work with them. That's their teacher. Great teacher. Anyway, so this is what Sadiq Khan said. These are our story discs where we invite all visitors to share a story, share their story of migration. So I migrated here, at least one of my parents migrated here, grandparents, for the different generations. Someone in my family emigrated from here. You can see bottom here. And there's one for, there's no known migrants in my family, no known migration story, but still we invite people to say what they want in terms of perhaps some political statement or their opinion. So he said, South London is my home, but my parents moved here in the 1960s. Thanks to their hard work, their contribution to London, I am now the mayor of London. So that's Sadiq's story. His parents, I believe, are from Pakistan. So yeah, the workshop, again, this is the same building, was a great place for our education programme. They're not in a circle, but usually they are. Room to Breathe was the exhibition that Tom and Safet mentioned. That's the one that they came to with their students. It was such a wonderful exhibition. Each of our exhibitions every year tests out kind of new ideas. What's the public going to respond to? What do they want more of? What do they want less of? How can we kind of build our experience and knowledge towards a permanent home? And so this is the kitchen table. Room to Breathe was a series of rooms sharing in lots of nooks and crannies, 150 stories of immigration to Britain over the last 70, 80 years, nearly all within living memory, apart from one contributor who was talking about her deceased father from Jamaica. Anyway, here we are in the kitchen. We had a kitchen, a bedroom, a barber shop, a primary school classroom, and an artist studio. At the kitchen table, we had three food stories, migration food stories, projected onto the table by an incredible animator called Kate Anderson. And the pupils here are enjoying Danny's full English breakfast. Danny's parents are from Galicia in Spain, and they moved to Oxford and basically worked their way up to setting up a true British greasy spoon, which is what we kind of call a cafe. And here you can see this is an animation that all moved, and so the pupils are trying to pick up the food, and it's all projected onto these 6 plates. It was really beautiful, and food obviously being a true equalizer when it comes to kind of talking about migration, identity, belonging, memory. So this is bringing us up to 2020. I think that's about right timing wise. I'm going to shut up quite soon. So 2020, we knew we had to leave the workshop. As I said, they got permission to tear the building down. And so we left in December 2019, moved across town, because through one of these site kind of search connections, we had the opportunity to open up in the middle of a shopping centre, which is a really new thing for us, a new thing for most museums. And so I believe Tom and Safet have been to visit. We did a breakneck redo of an H&M, a Hennes and Mauritz space. We're next to TK Maxx, as you can see on the photo, opposite Sainsbury's and Starbucks. You probably recognise the Starbucks logo. So right in the middle of a very busy Southeast London shopping centre. Breakneck redo, and we opened up on February the 14th, I remember, because we were giving out Valentine's Day chocolates, the opening day. And we had such an amazing first month, packed loads of visits, 13,000 visitors, which is about what we had in a year in the previous home, just showing you what it means to be in a very busy space. People popping in, then coming back at the weekend with their family. I'm only here on my lunch break, but I'll see you later kind of thing. Just it's a fantastic space one of our education funders said, I'm not sure why every museum is in a shopping centre really. And indeed in China, I believe that these things are happening. Galleries and museums are opening up in shopping centres because it's taking culture and heritage to people where they're at, rather than saying, come and see us, come and see us, come and find us, come out of your way to bother to come and find us. So that's 2 sections of the Berlin Wall that we managed to winch in. It took, I think, about 8 hours to bring them in at 4 a.m. Before we opened, and with 2 graffiti artists, their work just outside our space. And we quite like the idea that these 2 graffiti figures are kind of talking to each other across what is ostensibly the Berlin Wall, creating such a divide, whereas this is kind of dialogue. I want to just say that it's quite possible that you know other migration museums, because most countries have them. It's just us, we're a bit slow to get there. So as you can see, these are the locations of migration museums, or museums that cover migration themes significantly. 2 in Australia, 1 in Sri Lanka, 2, these ones in Africa, I think they might be 1 in Ghana, that is part of our network, Paris, Bremerhaven in North Germany, 2 in Italy, kind of maritime museums, etc. 1 in Dublin, a new one opened. And in fact, ground has just been broken for a new museum. I don't know, Andrew, if you know about this actually, but in Rotterdam, in Holland, they're just about to have a very crazy building for a new migration museum at a huge port in Holland. And back from international to national, part of my job is our education program, and part of my job is coordinating this network, because committing to creating a museum in London is quite a kind of, I suppose, political with a small p choice, when migration is such a totally national story. And so here, our network is our kind of commitment to helping to support and encourage migration work and migration themes across different regions in the UK. So we have events that bring people together to share what they're up to in terms of exhibitions, programs, their collections, etc. We can talk about this a bit more perhaps in the questions. We this year, as I said, we're open for just a month, and the shopping centre had to close. Because of the pandemic. We reopened in October for 6 amazing days, and now we're closed again. 2nd lockdown here. We hope to open again in December. Depends, I think, somewhat on what happens with the decisions around the next lockdown, this lockdown. But in the meantime, we've created, we kind of fundraised for and created incredible online digital exhibition. And as much as I'm not always a fan of museums, I'm not definitely a fan of digital exhibitions, because they can be really rubbish. But this one, you can imagine I'm biased, but we fundraised to get some really good website designers, and they've created a thing of real beauty called Heart of the Nation, Migration and the Making of the NHS, which is really about migrants and people of colour kind of fueling the NHS since its creation 73 years ago. Just quickly, plans right now. I mean, as I said, we opened for 6 days with this new exhibition, Departures. We're looking at the sailing of the Mayflower, the ship that left from here to the New World with the Pilgrim Fathers. In 400 years ago, we're looking at 400 years of emigration. So usually our exhibition's about immigration. This one's about emigration. It's amazing, and hopefully we'll have a chance to share it all the way through till next summer, when our time in the shopping centre might come to an end. We have an exhibition all about football planned for 2021 to join up with the Euros, which is apparently a football tournament. This is what we did before. We looked at just what the England team would look like without immigration, which went down well. It became viral on Twitter, but they kept leaving off our logo, so we didn't get the credit always. And sorry, the pixelated photo. We're going to be part of this thing called The Walk, which is a puppet of an 9-year-old Syrian girl called Amal, walking all the way from Turkey through to the UK on kind of that route. And she's coming through Lewisham, where we are. And we're doing activities connected to raising awareness about refugees and their connections in Lewisham and etc. So there we go. That is it. Where shall I leave a photo? Or in fact, I'll stop sharing. Thank you. We have some time for some questions.
Well, thank you very much, Emily, for that. That was very interesting. I think that when we go into museums, obviously we take for granted that they're there, and we're so consumed by what we're seeing and processing, we don't often think about your migration to creating migration as well.
You see, Jeff, you're a much better museum visitor than me. You're consumed by what you see rather than just mostly quite bored. So well done.
Well, there's a lot in there, and I know that certainly throughout the study of anthropology of travel, tourism, pilgrimage, we oftentimes look at how stories are being told and who is telling whose stories and how those sit within our worldview or our examination of the rest of the world. And so my first question to you as Director of Education and Learning in there is, has there been conflict around the way that you have portrayed some of these stories? And have you had anybody from any visitors object to some of the ways that you've told stories that may not have been originally yours to tell?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and it's so important for us to learn as we go along, because the issue of representation and who's telling whose stories and how much, etc., is a live issue and a very important issue. I suppose there's a few answers to that question. Partly is learning from other migration museums that are much more established than us around the world. I had a chance to go and visit many of them on a fellowship last year, and my question to all of them was, if you were us at our stage of the journey, what would you do, or what would you have done differently if you had the chance? And that got some really great input there. I think we definitely get some kind of kickback, I suppose, not as much, not in the way that you might be thinking, but in an interesting way that really for us just helps to prove that what we're doing is needed, and what we're doing is needed, kind of more of what we're doing is needed, in the sense that we get people who come into these temporary spaces that we have with exhibitions that are just a tiny snapshot about migration. Very much we are not the museum is not done. We are not telling everything yet. It's not kind of all laid out, as it were, which it hopefully will be in the future. Goodness help us to do that. But we get people come in and saying, I don't see Irish histories here. I don't see my story. I don't see enough about the Irish connection, or I don't see enough about Windrush and the kind of Caribbean immigration from the late 40s onwards. So it's people kind of the anger of omission is really quite something we come across fairly regularly, and of course our response is thank you, and please write it down so we can because what you're missing, what you're seeing that is not here, really proves that what we're trying to do is needed more, and that one day we will have a kind of more comprehensive layout and story, really. So I suppose that's some of the negative feedback we get, and then it really comes to working in partnership and spreading our kind of net really wide. We're Arts Council funded, which is a funding body here in the UK that is funded by taxpayers' money, and they fund different museums in different ways. But their emphasis is really about working with artists, and so that and platforming new emerging talent, artists of colour, artists with refugee background. And so that means that we work a lot with artists to interpret, because we don't have lots of migration collection, lots of migration heritage pieces, whereas we do have amazing artworks from emerging artists who tell those stories in their very unique ways. So I think, those, being compelled to work in those ways really helps us in that.
Great, thank you. We've had a number of comments come through. A lot of people really supporting Lewisham, which is nice.
Oh, nice. I'm going to look. This is in the comment section, yeah?
Yep, it says, thank you. The Museum of Lewisham is fantastic. Hope they'll prolong your contract. You and I spoke about that the other day, how for both of us, Lewisham Shopping Center holds a special place for such an exciting space. Great. We have Luke coming in from New York, although he's originally from Massachusetts, coming in from New York with a question.
Thanks. Thank you, Emily. That was really, really great. So what I was thinking about during your talk was when I lived in London to do the SOAS MA in anthropology of travel, tourism, and pilgrimage, I lived just off Windrush Square, and it was 2013, 2014. So that matched up perfectly with when the Black Cultural Archive was taking shape just on Windrush Square. So I, every day on my walk to the Tube, kind of watched that, project come to life, and it was really exciting. And then finally in I think July 2014, I got to go to the first exhibit there. So I'm curious, because it seems like that time frame lines up somewhat with when the Migration Museum's journey was beginning. I'm curious about what overlaps there have been or you continue to see between those two projects, and how much you have or have not or might work together. And then also just geographically, the fact that museum or center, I guess it's not exactly a museum, the archive is in Windrush Square, is so poignant and so meaningful for their mission. I mean, not just what it's about, but where it is and what that represents to their mission. So I'm curious, as you are talking about finding a more permanent home or maybe moving, what an ideal kind of location within the city of London or anywhere else in England might look like for your museum, if there's any kind of similarly poignant place in the city that you think could carry as much meaning as the Black Cultural Archive in Windrush Square, does for them.
Yeah, thank you. They're two great interlinked questions, really rooted in your experience of being in London. So yes, the Black Cultural Archives is very much a project that we are in touch with, and I know that I caught up with my boss just today, and she's just had a call with the director there to kind of make sure that what we're doing and what they're doing, we're up to date, and kind of that things are aligning. Interestingly, there's seems to be a real momentum of a group of people in the UK working to establish a museum of Black British history. And so you kind of hope that also will tie in with the work of the Black Cultural Archives, which is an archive and yet does have a kind of exhibition space that you mentioned that you've been to. So I think it's about understanding that there are different projects with slightly different aims, but yeah, it's our feeling with them and them with us, I believe, is very much like there's a space for all of us, and that these things can be quite complementary, because a museum of migration, looking at the long history of both immigration and emigration, the kind of Black British history that the archives are telling is one part of that migration story, big migration story. So yeah, and places of resonance. Yeah, I wrote down places of kind of migration resonance, because a lot of the migration museums that I know and visited as part of this fellowship are in very, very resonant spaces, on kind of docks or in warehouses that used to be used for immigration kind of sorting and purposes, or whatever it might be, like obviously Ellis Island, your side, and the Tenement Museum,
right.
And ones in Germany, Paris, bit of an awkward history with the building they have. I kind of would prefer to not have a building, I think, than have one that's got that colonial legacy. But anyway, I mean, the short answer is you kind of think about the main places of kind of historical kind of immigration in the UK. One is Tilbury, where the Windrush arrived, which is in the middle of Essex, and would be fairly hard to have a national museum popping up there. And the other one is Heathrow, and you don't necessarily want a museum at Heathrow, by our biggest airport. And so I think probably we are definitely of the mindset of beggars are not choosers. We will have a building wherever we can. And I think the stories that we're trying to tell and the history we're trying to convey doesn't necessarily need to be in a building that has that kind of resonance. And in fact, if you're in a building that has one story, or like one vein of stories, then you might somewhat limit yourselves. But of course, it makes sense for BCA to be in Windrush Square in Brixton because of the history of that part of London. But yeah, sorry, that was quite a long answer to your question, but I hope it makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. We have questions just coming in around the block right now. This is exciting. Orly Orbach has a question that I think will be able to be articulated better through their voice than mine.
Sure.
Hi, I was hoping just to have it read out, but I'm very happy if you can hear me to read it out.
Yeah, go for it.
What have I written? It's to do with temporality and permanence of images and displays. I put it so simply in a text, so I'd rather read it out than try to explain it again.
Go for it, read it, just read it out.
Yeah. Diplomatically written. So it's kind of two questions that interrelate, and one is to do with temporal exhibitions and the danger that can replicate in experiencing the temporality and insecurity for many migrant people. And the other question, or the other problem, is in fixed displays and representations. For instance, Jews and Muslims, when they're represented only when they wear a kippah or hijab, so the representations are fixed and easy to display. And I can give you plenty of examples because I work with museums, and I'm doing something like that now. But a very poignant example of the first one is I live above a restaurant where there is a man who I will name, I'm sure he'll be happy. He's called Hassan Damir, and he was a Kurdish, still is, but Kurdish kind of human rights activist in London. And he was in a museum exhibition in the Museum of London called Belonging in 2006. And he had a massive portrait of himself at the entrance, and he was very proud, and he showed his daughters. And me researching now as an anthropologist, I tried to look at this exhibition, and there's no information about it whatsoever. So it's kind of like temporal exhibitions where you have oral recordings that just disappear and are not available after a few months. So that's a temporal aspect. Sorry, that's a long question.
No, yeah, no. And it really helps to have, kind of what you have in mind with your relationship with the guy who's got the restaurant below you, Hassan, is that right?
Yes, this is not part of my research, but it kind of interconnects with.
Oh no, sure. But I mean, and that's in some ways that were more important than research, because that's someone's life and someone's life experience.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you're right. Obviously, to allude to the advantages and disadvantages of both temporary exhibitions and permanent exhibitions. Because there are good things and drawbacks about both. I know that definitely speaking, to people across the museum sector, both here in the UK and internationally, there's a feeling that once something is in the permanent exhibition, it can be a real nightmare to get that changed and updated, even 10 years later, because it's so expensive to kind of reinterpret or relabel and everything. And actually migration is a topic that is changing and shifting all the time, and should, I think, and the representation of it should shift and develop. So there's definitely tricky things about permanent exhibitions and how stuck in time, and how, as you say, they might tell a kind of very 2D story about one particular group or a particular individual. And in terms of the temporary side of exhibitions, I guess I think I hope it's not a kind of crass answer. But the truth is that it kind of works for us at the moment to not have a permanent space and to be testing ideas out, because every exhibition we do tries something a bit different. And I hope, I hope that because we're so small and because we're, I think we do build relationships and maintain relationships well. I think that we're, in touch with different artists we've worked with and different peoples whose stories we've kind of showcased, etc. But yeah, I think these are really, really big questions that we have on the horizon for when when I say when rather than if we get that permanent home, because it's such a big undertaking and it's such a sensitive undertaking, and the kind of community consultation that will need to go into it. I think there's a lot to come, but right now the way we function kind of keeps us a little bit protected from some of that, I suppose. And we need to make sure that our exhibitions are more digitally kind of captured, so that that legacy, so that if you don't get to come to Lewisham Shopping Centre, that you don't miss departures fully. So it's just the budgets for keeping fit to digitize things are really, it's expensive, but it's on our horizons. Yeah.
Thanks. I have lots of questions, but I'm sure lots of other people do as well. So I'm going to mute
Are
myself.
Are you based in London, Orly?
Yes, in Goldsmiths. So and
oh,
work
great.
with,
Okay.
many other museums. So indirectly with you,
good.
I think.
We will
I'll
talk
keep an eye
then.
out, and yeah, absolutely.
We'll talk more. Nice. That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. That certainly, the discussion about having things archived digitally is helpful to those of us that are unable to travel to at the moment, and those that are in schools, not just in the London area, but schools around the world that will be able to access this. So certainly, as children in schools go to more remote learning again, as the pandemic rears its head once more, the opportunity to get that messaging in those exhibits everywhere in the world now is wonderful. And hopefully those will contribute some donations to help you further those other exhibits. Our next question comes from Gail. Gail, I think it's Gail.
Hi.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation, first of all. It was, I find it very interesting. My question is actually, how do you handle public debates which are frankly vitriolic? Not more in the UK than in the rest of the world, but how do you handle, now that you're gaining visibility, this kind of public debate or hostile political discourse? How do you react to it?
Yeah. I think, how do we cope with that? I think our government's intentional hostile environment policy and all the kind of poisonous outflow from that just impacts all of us all the time in different ways, some of us more than others. And I think that, I suppose, what we're trying to achieve, and I think hopefully, Maya, Reinhilde, other people who've been to visit us or seen in person what we're doing, is kind of creating a space where you could come in and not be smacked in the face with kind of our stance and our mission, and yet hopefully kind of you could come in if you have negative views towards migration, towards immigration, and still kind of, I think, have an experience that might be not too confrontational, but might be instructive. I think very much our exhibitions try and share. It's just a lot about personal stories, and I think if that hasn't come across and I've not made that clear, then yeah, really sharing people's stories, because when it comes to research here in the UK about attitudes towards immigration, particularly immigration, are really around the fact that there's like a kind of spectrum of obviously how people feel, from very, very negative to totally kind of positive and up for migration of all sorts. And then a lot of people are like somewhere in the middle with kind of internally conflicting views, etc., and maybe anxious about some things, positive about some things, etc. And they might shift during their lifetime, etc. And I think what am I trying to say? I think the research suggests that hitting people, sorry, when I say smacking people in the face and hitting people, I don't mean literally, sorry, it's maybe British terminology, but confronting people directly with, these are the facts, this is how much immigration contributes to our economy, this is how much we need immigration, our falling fertility rates mean we need more immigrants, etc. I think the research just shows that just doesn't work, because it cements people feeling attacked, feeling preached at, feeling like they're being told they're stupid or that they're racist. And so really our approach is to fairly kind of gently through our different exhibitions provide different insights, different stories, lots and lots of space for people to share. Thank you, Adrian. To share their own feelings, opinions, experiences, to try and make things as inclusive as possible. So even if you don't have, like, if you're not an immigrant or you don't have immigration in your kind of parents or grandparents, you still feel connected to what you read and see. And I think being in Lewisham, which is such a diverse place, with people from different communities, we've had a really great reception, and generally really positive feedback. And just to on that, to speak to Reinhilde and to Maya, we hope to be in the space we hope to be in the space for a lot longer, but right now our contract runs till next June. It was extended from December next month to next June. But with the state of the high street and the state of shopping centres right now, we think that, you know, Lewisham Shopping Centre have been incredibly welcoming. The landlords are amazing. We hope it might be a lot longer, and perhaps we'll come to you for witness testimony to say, you can't let them leave, they've got to stay, it's amazing, etc. We might make you work for us. Anyway, I hope, Gael, that somehow answered. I think it's a huge topic, and I think it's going to, as I said, with a permanent home, going to be even bigger. The more you gain traction, the more momentum you build, the more you're going to kind of end up wading into these massive toxic debates. But that's why we're kind of building slowly, testing, and kind of getting people on side, I suppose. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. That was very helpful.
Thank you.
That's great. Helen has a question that follows up very similar to there, and then Christiane, I see raising your hand over there after Helen, please.
Hi, Emily.
Hello.
Hello. Thanks for sharing such a kind of frank and, you know, insightful introduction into the museum's development. As somebody who works in a kind of conventional bricks and mortar museum that doesn't move, I'm interested in what it means to move and what it means in terms of visitor profiles or audience demographics, and what that means in terms for the interpretive approach that the museum takes.
Lovely. Tell me first, Helen, which museum are you at?
Oh, I'm at Brighton Museum.
Brighton. Oh, Helen. Yes, right. I knew I recognised the name. We've talked about, me coming to speak to your students at one point. Anyway, strike got in the way. Brighton, that's right. So, what it means? Yeah, I mean, we being kind of moving from temporary space to temporary space, none of which have museum conditions, which means that none of them have the level of insurance you need, the level of humidity regulation. You know, like I said, our last space just leaked all the time, every time it rained. And so that means that we have to be very careful with, you know, what we borrow from people and how we borrow it and how we agree to kind of try and keep it safe. Different migration museums around the world choose different kind of tactics. The kind of perhaps some slight joke about migration museums is that, how do you display migration? Well, suitcases, and some passports, because obviously they're focusing so fully on the journey, the migration journey, rather than everything that comes, you know, later, the more kind of perhaps more important stuff on settling and making life in a new place. So I'm trying to work out if I'm answering because I can see your question here. I'm going to just read it in the chat as well a bit more. If you're more mobile, what about objects planned for? Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to having a permanent home, there might well be certain kind of objects and pieces that we look to collect or accession, or whatever the right word is. But right now we do a lot of borrowing. I always say beg, borrowing and stealing, but we don't steal anything. I promise we don't steal anything. We just beg and borrow and then return, and work with artists, like I've said, like that, show their pieces and then send them back at the end, or sell them if they let us. So yeah, I think I personally, this is not coming from the Migration Museum kind of officially, but a lot of us are obsessed with the African American Museum of History and Culture in DC, Washington DC, and they basically did a huge equivalent of like the Antiques Roadshow. They went around the States on a mega collecting mission and said, what have you got in your family, you know, archives, photo albums, cupboards, kitchen drawers that tell us about the Black experience, African American history in the US. And they basically did a huge collecting kind of drive like that. I think there's something interesting about that, because I think you'd end up with a collection that might well be a lot more varied than if you kind of know what you want and you just try and get those certain pieces. I don't know. So The answer is we haven't really worked out our collections policy yet. But when we do, Helen, I can tell you more. This is my evasive answering.
Good. Christiane has a question. Then Kelly Price has something that's very, very interesting as well. And then Safet will probably close us down with his comment there. So Christiane, please.
I actually have two questions. The first one has to do with the photo you showed, the slide you showed with the art installation with people eating an English breakfast, you know, the bacon and eggs and sausage and all that. And it's important because for example, when it comes to migrant communities, the issue of eating food from back home is important because it's a sort of way of recreating home and the sensory experience of eating of food of their country of origin. But here you are showing food that is English. So I would like to hear something about it from you. And another thing I would like to know a bit more about was the last slide where you showed people emigrating to the US, starting from the Mayflower and on. So what kind of things did you do what kind of approach did you have for this exhibition?
Sure, thank you. Cool, I'll try and answer fairly briefly because I know we're slightly beyond time. The English breakfast question, good question. I loved the kitchen in Room to Breathe, and we have got Room to Breathe up in Lewisham as well, but it's just, if you can imagine, like the least COVID able exhibition. It's like, touch this, sit here, put these headphones on, you know, read this, pick it up. And so yeah, I think we'll open it again once there's a vaccine, basically. But the English breakfast projection is a play really on the idea of an English breakfast, because it's the story of this guy, Danny, who was born here, but both of his parents are from Spain. And when they moved to Oxford, they opened a like quintessentially English cafe. And so he talked about how his Spanish father became like the king of the English breakfast. And the animator shows him like surrounded by millions of eggs, hundreds of thousands of rashers of bacon, because he was creating, this food for a kind of English audience, despite not being English himself. And so that's the answer. And yet there's also another kind of diversionary answer, which is so much of what we consider to be quintessentially English is not. And I think there can be a whole, I can see some nods, there could be a whole exhibition about that. In fact, I know that there's an intervention in the Ashmolean in Oxford called A Nice English Cup of Tea, around just the kind of how the things that we think of as of English, fish and chips, tea, English breakfast, loads of those ideas just and kind of products just aren't English in any way. We just like to lie. So that's the answer to that. I hope that covers that. But yeah, one of the other stories on the projection onto the table is about a woman from Poland living in London, how she has her mum used to always make the same cake, and now she recreates it in London to kind of feel connected to her mum, who's now passed away. And that story made me cry every time. Nightmare when you're delivering an education program, to be weeping. So Departures is really interesting because it kind of, as I said, a lot of our work so far has been about immigration and attitudes, you know, and stories of immigration. And this one's really flipping it on its head and talking about the kind of unquestioned British right to go and live wherever we damn please over the last 400 years. So it's designed, it's great. And as I said, I'm going to boast always about our exhibitions. It's designed as an airport departure lounge, which is funny because none of us are going into airports at the moment, or very little. So you walk in, there's a departures desk where you're given a boarding pass, and then you're directed to one of 7 departure gates. And each of those departure gates looks a different theme of why people have left over the last 400 years. So escape, dream, forced to leave, kind of lifestyle. So we cover the Australian gold rush, the transport of convicts. We look at £10 POMs. We look at Windrush scandal and people being deported now, despite having lived in the UK for decades due to citizenship kind of disputes. We look at people repats, which is young people whose parents might be, let's say, from Nigeria, but they were born here, but they choose to go and live in Nigeria and like live a life there. So it really covers a whole load of different interesting stories from different researchers, different artists. Yeah, it's, as one of our youth panel said, oh, great, yeah, an exhibition about emigration. That's good, because we're always banging on about immigration here. It's time we thought about that, really. So, yeah, out of the mouths.
Great, that leads very well into Kelly Price's question for you.
Sure.
Hi.
Hi, Kelly.
I mean, I was kind of thinking if your museum is talking about like kind of migration stories in the UK. I'm not sure if you have like already, or if you would ever consider kind of including the ways that the UK has been implicated or like involved in the displacement of people like overseas in the like the Middle East or, you know, other areas, because kind of there's a lot of kind of British involvement or like things that Britain have done that has like forced people to be like displaced. So yeah, that was just like a thought I had.
Yeah, well, definitely Departures touches on some of what you talk about, Kelly, particular stories of the kind of the legacy of what we have a whole section about empire and colonialism and the impacts on different countries around the world. And I think that we touch on it a bit, and we're not kind of shy to touch on it, but I think it's such a big topic that will need to be part of our the permanent home, and will involve, I think, quite a lot of international cooperation to make sure that that's told in ways that actually truthfully respect the history that we're telling. But if you've got specific examples in mind, you should get in touch with me, and kind of we'll add that into the mix of what we're thinking kind of longer term, because as I said, it's one big consultation process really with all the things we can and should cover.
That's great, thanks.
Thanks.
Excellent. Safet is going to finish off with a question that I think we all are curious about, and then I will wrap things up for you. But thank you, Kelly, for that.
Emily, thank you so much for what you're doing and for the museum as this really powerful educational hub that we've noticed in our work means so much to what we do, and creates these connections between the academia and the community, and it's just really what we need. And you do it so well. I haven't seen the Departures exhibition, but the way you describe it now, it makes sense, because the room to breathe was, and I told you, before I visited, that I had all these, assumptions about how it's inevitably going to simplify things, and it's going to be, it's such a difficult topic to sort of think about, so complex. And when we arrived, it was so subtle, so carefully done, to include art and narratives, and there was this sort of ethnographic attention as well to kind of detail, you could see. So it was just wonderful. And now, as this educational hub, is continuing, I know that there is also another segment of your work, which is this migration network. And I imagine that for all of us, this is another really exciting sort of aspect of your work that perhaps we can join in on. And I know that you have some events planned. So perhaps if you could just introduce us to the Migration Network a little bit, and some of the plans or the reasons, why this was created. And thank you.
Sure, yeah. I'll just quickly say that I think the reason that our exhibitions have a bit of a kind of ethnographic feel is because Aditi also is an anthropologist. She that was her degree over in the States. So yeah, we get everywhere. So the network, I suppose, if I talk about the network from a kind of a couple of different angles, it's like a national network of trying to increase and improve and encourage work on migration and related themes in museums and galleries across the UK, with a kind of understanding that realistically a museum in London is going to be only ever visited by a certain kind of amount of people, a certain group of people from, you know, the surroundings and not necessarily from across the UK. And actually, if you want to understand about migration in Hull, let's say, you need to be able to do that at the museums and libraries and galleries in Hull and not in London. We can't be the ones to ever really fill that gap. And so museums and galleries across the UK, I find are filled, at least my experience, they're filled with people like passionate about social justice, passionate about migration, about the kind of cohesion in their communities where they're based. And so these events, Safik came along to the first one, mega Zoom events, a bit like this, but I suppose a few more people as well, was for the northwest of England, which was kind of taking in kind of Liverpool, Manchester, Lancashire, and some of Northern Ireland as well, was really a chance to kind of showcase and platform some work happening in different museums and galleries with different community groups, refugee groups, different artists, to share some kind of some best practice, some ideas, and then really give people a chance to network, ask questions, and make kind of connections to follow up on, to shadow, to observe each other's work, see what's applicable in different places. So we have 6 of those events, 5 more coming up. The next one's going to be in January, at the end of January, for the Northeast and Yorkshire, so Northeast of England and Yorkshire, and packed with content. There's so much to cover, from small towns to bigger kind of metropolises. Is that right? Metropolitan anyway, cities up there, and so really it's kind of it suits us at the Migration Museum because we get to hear about and learn from and be inspired by lots of good stuff happening across the UK, but it's also kind of our chance to kind of contribute, to not say we're in London, this is it, full stop, this is all that matters, because there is, if any of you have, you know, some of you have lived in the UK or visited the UK, you'll know that there's some kind of divides and some prejudice around north-south divide / London and everything else. And so, yeah, this is just a way to be useful and support and platform lots of good stuff happening, and you know, push for more, I suppose. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you for putting the link. Yeah, if you want to, there's a really short expression of interest form. And so, for example, I know Helen might well want to, you know, could be involved with the work going on in Brighton. If you just fill in a very short expression of interest form, and you can there say what region you're interested in learning to be part of. Yeah, thank you.
We have one final question from Jens coming in, and also with these links that have been posted. Maya posted a link that relates to Jens's question. And so as we distribute this link to the recording of the video, we'll also, within that email, distribute the links to all these other, we'll link to links, so to speak. But Jens, please, quite a question.
Hello. I actually didn't mean it really as a question, just a message to take home. I think this is not to be easily solved just like that. So I just can imagine that a migration museum attracts a lot of attention also by activism and activists who finally see their stories and their issues on the table. And at the same time, I think it's good to be involved, but at the same time, you might also be confronted with people, yes, who want to see their communities displayed in the museum. So I wonder if you have a good strategy for that, or if you have been confronted with that sort of dilemma of involvement and keeping at a distance or not. Thanks.
Yeah, I was just trying to find, I'm not sure it's in this book actually, an amazing quote that a visitor left in our kind of visitor book. There we go, yeah. I mean, it's one tiny anecdote, Jens, but I will then, you know, answer your question a bit more fully. But someone wrote in our visitor book just in October, my mother told me about her experiences on arrival to Britain. The Migration Museum illustrated them. I felt as though I was seeing through her eyes on my first visit. She died some months ago. Please stay open. Please keep the memories and experiences alive. Thank you. And, you know, to my knowledge, it wasn't that we were showing, in this case, her mother's story, but she felt that she experienced her mother's experience through the other things that were shared and kind of on display, etc. So I think that your question was really around the kind of balance between activism and backlash. Could you because I was sorry, could you just repeat your question kind of once more, and I'll see if I can.
It's not a very simple thing. I just can imagine that, let's say, a lot of people, as you say, so you finally there's this migration history or migrations are present in a how do you say, in a place that is canonized in a sense. So it's elevated on a higher level in a sense. So a lot of people want to be involved, and probably it's also good to involve people. I know about an exhibition in Dresden about racism, and so let's say people of color felt they were excluded or were not participating, so they complained that they had not been part of the exhibition, and then they were involved in a sense as a comment to the exhibition. So this kind of things. On the one side, you're a museum professional, so you want to do a professional museum, and on the other hand, it's an issue that is so present in people's lives, so they probably also want to be part of making exhibitions and producing exhibitions and having their own stories in there. But then, of course, let's say only because you're from an immigrant community, it doesn't mean that you have the distant, reflexive view with all the different hybridities in there that you would like to show, probably as a professional museum maker.
I really see the kind of the balance that you're talking about. And just incidentally, I read about Dresden, the kind of main, I don't know, museum in Dresden. Also, the director there, a woman, was fairly new to the job, and she actually opened the museum up as well to the far right, who were I think kind of campaigning and protesting in the city. And she said, like, I was really scared about this, but I opened up like a forum where, and so I'm glad that it's kind of gone both ways, that she's the cultural sphere in Dresden is managing to absorb lots of different voices and competing voices. I know that a museum we're working with in the network had exactly that. There was the people from the the African Caribbean community up in this town in Yorkshire said, you never consult us, you never work with us, we never see our stories in your museum. And again, they said, right, it's time, we need to open this conversation up. And they had quite a kind of tense community forum, and yet it led to a great collaboration and, you know, really making people happy after a long time of anger, and some great exhibitions in shopping centres and the museum. And it feels like there are ways to bring those kinds of relationships around, and yet it can be incredibly difficult and sensitive. I think that we are, like I've said many times, and I come to realize more and more, just so lucky with our curators. I think they tread some very difficult lines really well. They have real aesthetic and beauty kind of standards and ideas and kind of visions, and yet it's all done with so many different contributors and stories and oral histories, and work with artists. I say it like it's like always a good thing, and it's sometimes really tricky. Artists can have incredibly differing ideas of how they want to work with you, be displayed, etc. So I think probably we wouldn't be where we are, and we wouldn't have got this far if we didn't have some real skill in that kind of level. But that's just not to say that it's always going to be like that, and we're not going to come up against these kinds of issues about portrayal, about representation, about including lots of different voices. I feel so far, with the kind of thousands of visitors we've had so far, all credit to nearly all of our visitors that seem to kind of get on board and be really positive about what we're doing. Like you say, they're happy to kind of, that there's something. And yes, I think they, you know, they want to see more and better. Like I said, they might want to see more about certain communities. And yet most really have faith in us, which is, I think that's fair to say, Andrew, isn't it, really? Looking at you kind of about just how I think we're pretty lucky with how we're received. But that, I'm sure that won't always be the case, and we've got to prepare for that as well.
Thank you, Emily, for all your time today. And thank you all for participating and viewing this. As mentioned, this has been recorded, and after a little bit of editing, will pop up onto the information superhighway on the xeniaseries.com website. We'll also send everybody who attended today a link to that. I would like to make a plug for the website that you have, Emily, and would like to encourage everybody here who has not visited migrationmuseum.org to do so. And also, the next time that you're sitting around at home, which a lot of us will be doing for a while, and you think, let's see what's on Netflix. Let's see if we've reached the end of the internet yet. I would suggest going to migrationmuseum.org. If you have a partner, or if you have children or know of partners, you can access this website at the same time on multiple tablets or devices in your house, and you can explore the different exhibits together. And this will lead to a wonderful conversation over dinner time, something not about the pandemic, something not about the current state of politics in the world, but you can visit this museum. And for those of you that have nephews or nieces or family members, and you're looking for something educational to do anywhere in the world, do this and visit. And for those that say, my gosh, I feel guilty, how can I consume this wonderful museum for free? Well, there's also an area for donations on the Migration Museum visit. And you can simply do that to help support this museum and help support it in all of its spaces, to bring more things online so that those of us around the world can continue to share these stories that you present to us. Thank you very much, Emily. Thank you for taking this time. Our next Xenia series will be on December 17th with the very distinguished Emma Tarlow, who will talk about her research project on hair. And this involves a group from Israel going to India to see whether or not the purchase of hair brought back for wigs to be used in Israel does create some sort of challenge in this, a topic that we are all very excited to hear more about. So thank you again, Emily, and thank you all for participating in the Xenia series. We will be sending you all of these details and hope that we'll see you on December 17th in our last Xenia series of 2020. Thank you all very much and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.